this was an act of self-defense, though he did say it's important for the investigation to play out. Having seen the officer's cell phone video, how do you see this? Do you think he was acting in self-defense?
Well, first of all, let's make it clear, there's not going to be an investigation. The vice president has essentially already declared that this officer has absolute immunity, and in fact, every immigration officer has absolute immunity. Now, this is the most high-profile and most heinous act of violence that has been undertaken, but there have already been over a dozen shootings all across our country by ICE officers. The bottom line is that the way in which DHS is conducting itself today is making our communities less safe. It's not adding to public safety. I heard him say that they are undertaking targeted enforcement actions against criminals. Just not true. The vast majority of people they are rounding up are peaceful immigrants. You've seen the videos of them walking through parking lots, asking people whether they are American citizens or not. They are putting citizens of Minneapolis, citizens of the communities they are in harm's way. Period. Stop. That's why the mayor of Minneapolis says, if you want to make Minneapolis safe, get out of Minneapolis. And the same thing applies to communities all across the country.
Let me ask you, because you're proposing sweeping reforms to DHS, from requiring warrants for arrests to banning masks during enforcement to limiting ICE's use of firearms in civil operations. Do any Republicans support your plan? Is it realistic that this could actually pass, Senator?
Well, Republicans need Democratic votes in order to pass a budget for the Department of Homeland Security. And what we're talking about, I wouldn't necessarily categorize as sweeping, right? We're simply talking about, essentially going back to the way that ICE was operating when they cared about legality, right? Identification of officers, that's something that has been standard practice in every law enforcement agency all across the country. The CBP, who are supposed to be at the border, protecting us at the border, operating in the interior with no training on how to deal with complex urban environments, that's brand new. So we just need to get back to a Department of Homeland Security that is prioritizing the law and prioritizing keeping people safe. And yes, I think that it's reasonable for Democrats, speaking on behalf of the majority of the American public who don't approve of what ICE is doing, to say, if you want to fund the Department of Homeland Security, I want to fund a Department of Homeland Security that is operating in a safe and legal manner.
Well, you take me to my next question, because you posted online earlier this week, quote, Democrats cannot vote for a DHS budget that doesn't restrain the growing lawlessness of this agency. You obviously know government funding runs out in less than 3 weeks. Are you actually willing to shut down the government over these DHS proposals?
Well, I mean, the question is for Republicans. Are they willing to shut down the government simply to endorse the most lawless Department of Homeland Security in the history of the country? Both parties come to a discussion on the budget with priorities. And let me just give you an example of what we're talking about. The amount of training that is given to an ICE officer has been cut in half by this administration. And the number of days of training they get are 47. You know why they get 47 days of training? As an homage to the vanity of the President of the United States. 47 days of training for the 47th president. So we have officers on the streets today who are receiving half as much training, and so no wonder the number of violent incidents are going through the roof. We just want a Department of Homeland Security that is prioritizing people's safety.
But you're not ruling out a potential government shutdown over this battle for DHS reforms.
That's a decision for Republicans.
But you don't rule it out.
They control the House, the Senate, and the presidency. If they don't want to work with Democrats and shut down the government, that's up to them. And by the way, the last time the government shut down, everybody in the country knew that it was Republicans that caused it.
Well, some Democrats have been calling for years to abolish ICE, and those calls have been raised and amplified, quite frankly, again this week. Would you support, in the wake of this shooting, abolishing ICE?
Well, of course you need a domestic enforcement mechanism for the immigration laws of this country, but the way in which ICE is operating today is inhumane and illegal. They've rounded up a 16-year-old kid in Meriden, Connecticut, weeks before he was about to graduate, in the country legally, put him in detention for 6 months, and he got let out right before Christmas because the administration wouldn't even show up in court to defend what they had done. I mean, that is happening thousands of times over in this country. Peaceful, legal immigrants being put in detention. That's not a system that anybody in this country wants to fund.
You have waged a number of criticisms against this administration. Speaker Emerita Nancy Pelosi was asked back in December, so last year, whether Democrats should put impeachment talk back on the table for the president if they in fact take back the House in 2026. She suggested the president had not yet crossed a line that would trigger impeachment. Do you agree with her?
Well, as you know, I would be a juror in an impeachment trial,
Yes.
so I don't generally give advice to the House on whether or not they should impeach. But listen, I have common sense, and so I know that this president has committed 10 times more impeachable offenses in his second term as he did in his first term. He is stealing from the American people. The amount of corruption that he is involved in, taking a luxury private jet from Qatar, trading national security secrets to a foreign nation in exchange for a $2 billion investment in his cryptocurrency. That is wildly corrupt. The House will make their own determination, but I don't think it's any secret that the president's level of corruption and illegality is nuclear grade in his second term compared to his first term.
So it sounds like you disagree with Nancy Pelosi there. Let me ask you about Venezuela. You have called Nicolas Maduro an illegitimate leader, and in 2019 you wrote, quote, "Getting rid of Maduro is good for the United States." Is Venezuela now better off without Nicolas Maduro? Do you give the Trump administration some credit for that?
So Maduro is an illegitimate leader. Putin is an illegitimate leader. That doesn't mean that it's good policy to invade those countries. What we have seen over and over is that American military hubris, thinking that we can impose a political reality on a foreign country by force, ends up making us less safe. So yes, I thought that it was important for America to pursue a diplomatic strategy with our Latin American allies to try to force elections in Venezuela so as to allow the Venezuelan people to move Maduro out of power. I have never supported an invasion of Venezuela because I
But
think...
is the country better off?
Well, apparently, this new person in charge, Delcy Rodriguez, is imposing a brutal crackdown on the Venezuelan people that's worse in some ways than what Maduro did. So for the Venezuelan people, nothing has changed. All it seemingly has changed is that American oil executives are going to get access to greater amounts of profit out of Venezuela. So this has never been about, Venezuela is not about American national security interests. It's about what's best for Trump's Mar-a-Lago oil industry buddies.
Let me ask you about another focus, Greenland. I had the opportunity to speak with President Trump earlier this week. He said he is, quote, very serious about annexing Greenland. In a later interview, he didn't take military options off of the table. And of course, it's an autonomous territory of Denmark, which is a NATO ally. Do you think annexing Greenland would effectively be the end of NATO?
It would be the end of NATO, right? I mean, NATO would have an obligation to defend Greenland, and so query whether we would be at war with Europe, with England, with France. But let's also talk about what's at stake here. The president is spending every single day thinking about invading Greenland, managing the Venezuelan economy, building a ballroom. He is not thinking about the American people at all. This month, premiums, health insurance premiums on 22 million Americans are going up, doubling in some cases. Kids aren't able to eat 3 meals because the Trump administration has slashed food assistance. And so every single day, the president is thinking about Greenland, his ballroom, Venezuela. He is spending no time thinking about the actual crises that are being visited on American families. This is a president who is distracted by things that don't matter to the American people at a moment where the American people are in crisis. That is the underlying reality of a White House that has become out of control.
Senator Chris Murphy, thank you for being here. Thank you for being here in person. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.
All right, when we come back, Minneapolis.